Welcome, everyone, on this Thursday, January 5th, 2017. We made it, guys, all the way to 2017.
2017, that's good.
Wow.
Man.
Yeah, I didn't think I was going to. There were times I didn't think it was going to happen, but it did. Welcome, everyone. This is the MMA Beat. We are down a man today. Usually the host in this chair is Ariel Helwani. He is out today, so we will do our best to fill in while he is not present. By the way, it's also 75,000 degrees in the studio. Big shouts to the folks at SB Nation for keeping us comfortable. My name is Luke Thomas. I am, of course, with MMA Fighting and SiriusXM.com. The gentleman to my left you should know very well from the Washington Post. It is Jeff Wagenheim. And at the very end, the man in the hat, also the man in the shirt, the man in the hat is Chuck Mindenhall from MMA Fighting as well. All right. Let's get this going. I feel good. I slept well. I'm not hungover. That's a first. Lot to get to. UFC 207 was on Friday, last Friday, and here we are. This is the very first show of 2017, and I know there's been a gazillion reactions to Ronda Rousey. So we're going to break this up into two parts, not the show itself, but the discussion about her. One is going to be about the media coverage of her, both before and then after the fact. Let's table that for just a moment. Let's talk about her. Jeff, I'll start with you. What a stunning turn of events. Not so much that she lost, not so much necessarily that she got knocked out, but that everything we saw leading up to it, the media silence, the blackout, I should say, and then she goes in there and barely lands a shot, loses in 48 seconds. One of the biggest stars in female sports, certainly in mixed martial arts. What went wrong? What happened?
She talked a lot about not wanting to handle media stuff. She wanted to focus. And it seems as though maybe she just was so uber focused, so tightly wound that when she went in there, she just couldn't perform. And you watch that fight. It wasn't shocking that she lost in 48 seconds. I don't think it was shocking to anybody that the fight ended that way. I mean, I think that there was certainly some Rousey supporters would have imagined maybe she would go in there and finish Nunes in less than a minute, because she was finishing women that quickly. And then the other side of it, Nunes is such a fast starter. If she was going to get to Rousey, it made sense that she would have got to her fast. So the quick stop to the fight was not a shock, but just the idea that she had absolutely nothing and that she was as stiff as a board. So this whole thing about relieving the pressure from herself, which, I know we talked about this in the show last week. I kind of supported her concept of not spending a lot of time talking to media and just kind of keeping her focus where it was. Well, it turned out that it really backfired for her because, we could talk about technique and all that stuff, but I think that this is a mental thing for her. She went out there and she was not present and she had no answer at all.
What's sad is maybe 6 months out from this whole thing, you could envision a scenario almost going down like this. Maybe not the media silence and everything, but a situation where when she finally did take that, got back in the octagon, she may be a shell of the person that we'd seen, dominant for so long. And unfortunately, that was my take as I was watching it. You're like, wow, this is just. It wasn't even a surprise because you'd seen her knocked out and you knew that this was a person who with a damaged psyche. I thought just from how she's handled stuff. You just read between the lines all the way through the last year. But just watching it happen as it unfolds and it becomes an actuality, it's just something that's really happening in real time, and you see it and you think, she's just not the same person anymore. This is just not the same fighter. And I kept wondering, just from a stylistic standpoint, what adjustments would she make? What would she do differently? Like, she was used to being very aggressive and really not worrying too much about getting clipped. As long as she got in close and was able to do her damage and take it to the mat or whatever, it just didn't look like the same fighter. And I don't know, you don't know what they worked on. I know we heard the corner, talking and which was basically just head movement and things like
frantic,
just frantic craziness, and she just didn't do any of that. And it was not a shocking thing because I think a lot of us were wondering where her mind would be. It was that type of outcome would have been just as unsurprising if she would have went in there, hit Amanda with a body shot and threw her to the ground and armbar. I mean, I would have been equally like, well, I guess she was ready for it.
Even Jose Aldo had lost in 13 seconds.
Yeah.
The speed of it, I don't think, is necessarily. I mean, it's alarming, but by itself is not alarming. Oh, she lost in 48 seconds. Okay, well, that can happen. But to me, it was like, here's the interesting part about this, Chuck, and I'll pitch it back to you. In the aftermath, we're trying to sort of do this autopsy on what happened. Like, what caused this? Frankly, all that mystery surrounding it, both before and the fact she didn't speak afterwards, we really still don't have a good idea. We're pointing at Edmund. We're pointing at the fact she didn't do media. We're pointing at maybe she still had the psychological hurdles from the Holly Holm loss. Truth is, we don't have a clue.
Yeah.
We don't have a clue.
Everybody has a valid take on it because we don't know.
Is it smart for her to sow that kind of uncertainty?
No, not really. I know I talked to Ariel on Monday about this a little bit. I just think that big picture, if she had a big picture in mind. Now, I know she just got rattled. She took a bunch of shots to the face, but big picture, you think that she would have had some kind of plan to maybe address something. Just because she went into the fight with this media blackout, she wasn't going to talk to media and everything, you think she would have a message to her fans one way or another. Just use the hot mic and just say something like, hey guys, I gave it my best effort, maybe whatever it is. Whatever she's thinking on a deeper level other than just the competition, but we got none of that. So it just leaves you to...
It just compounded the earlier
That's all it
issue.
does. That's all it does. And unfortunately, I mean, it's a bad look. I mean, in the end, and I know that people, I've written about it and people have talked to me a lot about this, but in my mind, it's a really bad look. You're in a sport where that sort of transparency and hype and everything that goes around it and coming out of it and humanizing yourself at the right times and letting your fans take your plight with you, to let them actually suffer, to show them the courage, whatever, outside of it. It's just, you saw none of that. Like I was mentioning to him, imagine if Hillary Clinton loses the election, but then she doesn't show up for a concession speech. She doesn't give you that moment to die with her on that platform.
You can find her hiking in the hills, though.
Yes. So, I mean, honestly, it's just the whole way through, it's just been poorly handled. And I wish I could hear from her, honestly. I would love to really know, truly, authentically, what's going through her mind.
Now, there's a lot to unpack about the aftermath and about her approach before and after, but just about the actual fight and how it went down. We've watched a million fights. We always know that there's sort of two things that athletes go with. One is the plan or the technique, the things that they've trained for, and then the other is that instinct that athletes just fall back on. And obviously she didn't have a good plan going into this fight because we saw what happened, but we've seen other fighters who were overwhelmed in a certain aspect of the fight, and then they just go back to instinct. In Ronda Rousey's case, instinct is, grab a hold of the gi and throw that judoka down to the mat. Well, there were a couple moments where it looked like she was almost grabbing for an invisible gi, but she wasn't really committing to something that resembled grappling. And it was kind of a puzzling thing to see that not only, she hadn't evolved since the Holly Holm loss, she hadn't worked on whatever it was that she had to work on to get better at the stand-up, and that even despite that, she didn't even commit to the other thing that had made her the dominant champion that she'd been beforehand, to do whatever, to sell out just to get that fight to the ground. We've seen wrestlers just do things where they look desperate, but they finally get that takedown. And she did not do anything to even make it look like she was trying to get it there.
I wonder if she split in two, because obviously, like when you get down to it, she was this competitor, right? We always knew that her competitiveness is what we really latched onto early. Wow, this woman is sublime. What she's doing, it's like Tyson and all this. But you wonder once she started, collecting these near 8-digit paydays, all these things are coming to her, how much she still believed her competitor was there, but it's really not there. How much she really wants these things.
You think she's kidding herself?
It could be. I mean, like I said, we can speculate as to what's going through, but we wonder if her drive is there. This is also a person who's
She looked physically
Yeah, she
ridiculous.
did. She looked like she was, but it's always so different, especially in the psychological game of having been knocked out. We always talk about this in other fighters who come back. Well, hers was just magnified times 100, right? Like getting knocked out the way she did and had to deal with as much criticism and schadenfreude of, after that loss. So I think that she may believe, like you said, kidding herself, she may believe that she was going towards something in an old original way, but it just wasn't there because she no longer has that comparison. She no longer has that rooting, that desire deep down to do it. Because when you look at it, she has accomplished more and she's made a lot more money than just about everybody in the sport. Maybe besides Conor McGregor, right? That would be about it. But besides everybody else, she's a pioneer in those ways as well.
Let's do this then. We can sort of speculate about what went wrong for a good portion, but there's a different way to analyze the situation, namely, what's going to be her legacy? Now, look, there is a possibility she could come back, and frankly, I would say I would like to see it. Normally, when fighters are at this stage in their career, if it is a stage, I'm usually the first person, you guys know, if you're looking poor and you're not interested in doing this anymore, you should go. Yeah. But I would hate for her to be remembered so vividly for these beatdowns. That aside, okay, let's assume this is the end. Jeff, how will she be remembered? How should she be remembered?
Well, I think that as MMA creeps toward the mainstream, we've already seen some of the way that she's being treated.
Save that a little bit.
Yeah, I know. And so, but that's relevant in the sense that as more people who have not been following the sport for too long become interested in the sport, what the Ronda Rousey they're going to know is the Ronda Rousey that got beaten 48 seconds and the Ronda Rousey that got knocked out by Holly Holm. Not the Ronda Rousey who, previous to Holm, won her previous 3 fights in what, 14, 16, and 34 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, and never, and once I think had been taken out of the first round and won almost every single fight in the first minute. Was just so dominant over the other women. And I know that you can talk about different levels of competition and women have gotten better, but there was also something about her. I mean, she was, her legacy, in my mind, is that she's the pioneer. She's the reason that women's MMA exists. Really, in the big picture, I know that there were women fighting before the UFC took it on, but that was in the shadows. I mean, she's the reason that women's MMA is a big deal out there. In the same way that you can point to certain people in the men's realm who really elevated things beyond what it was before. So to me, that's going to be the legacy. I think that that's going to be the legacy that she deserves. The legacy that I think is going to be foisted upon her, though, is going to be that it's either going to range from, well, she was a fraud to begin with, and this is just proof of it, or she was great when the competition wasn't very good, but then all of a sudden they caught up to her and she got surpassed. I think that's the kind of, somewhere in that realm is where the popular opinion is going to fall.
Well, I'll tell you what, within the hysteria of this thing happening, because you know how it is on fight night and coming out of it, everybody's just so worked up. It's hard to sort through that sort of question because it's just forming, right? You're like, wow, this is a lot to put together. I tweeted out, because Amanda Nunes had tweeted out that picture of her pushing Rousey on the stroller. I tweeted out like, hey, this is good. I have no problem with it because I love that sort of thing. Why not? Go ahead and do what you want. But I was like, just remember, you're holding that belt and you're able to tweet this to such fanfare because of Ronda Rousey. And you've never seen such a deluge of people coming at me for that. I mean, they didn't want to hear that Ronda Rousey was the original or that she was the one who pushed it through and got it into the UFC, because that narrative has existed for so long, and I think there's a part of people that don't want to they don't want to keep hitched to the reverent side of it right now because they're of the way she's carried herself in this last year, and it's completely understandable. I mean, she has shut down so many facets. I know that people have said, her charity work and all these things have been noted. I don't know how much they're out there, but people are bringing these things up. I think you can look at this, some of the merit of her being a good person and levels that we're not seeing and everything, and maybe at some point these two things marry up again and you're saying, like, she's the pioneer of the sport, which is the absolute truth. I hope, like you're saying, where should she be? That's where she should be, I think, in my mind. Any pioneer, anybody who was able to push it through and be like a comet through the sky really in the sport, because she came in and just went through all those women, and she still obviously has by far the most defenses in this weight class. We don't know if we'll see that again, frankly. I mean, there's so much parity in that division. She's going to be remembered, I think, ultimately as the pioneer who went through and did all this. Now, will people like her anymore because of it? Maybe not. That's where it gets compromised. Maybe she's not as likable as she once was.
We mentioned, I think quite rightly, that she was this catalyst, not the first, but this incredible boost to the women's side of the game. So then we have to ask ourselves, she could come back, but if she doesn't, Chuck, did she do enough work to truly launch women's MMA? Because there are some interesting and noteworthy female fighters. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Paige Van Zandt, right? Some of those are two strawweight fighters, but of course Amanda Nunes, and we can go through the cast of characters. Although Misha's out of the game as well, Holly's on 2 losses, you get the idea. She launched it into a new space. Enough of a new space? Is it a comfortable new space? She did a tremendous amount of work. I mean, just one person to do that much is incredible. But what I'm wondering is, in her absence, was that really enough work to sustain it over the long haul?
It's an interesting question, man. I mean, when you look at her and what she was able to do, I mean, we were talking just the opposite of her. We thought she was media savvy.
Just real quickly, there's still only 2 women's, well, I guess there's 3 women's divisions in the UFC, but you get the idea. There's really only 2. Yeah, there's 2. What am I saying? There's 2.
There's 2 and something coming up. But I mean, she was and she was a perfect storm, really. When you really look at it, how she was able to handle herself, her look, just being able to be. I said it before, like she could look dominant in the cage, and then on the red carpet she looked equally natural. She was able to make that transformation. Not every woman athlete is going to be able to do that, and that's the first thing that you got to say, like, how much does that matter in the sport? I mean, some people want to downplay it. We don't like to look at it, but how much does that stuff translate? She was very good with the media. She was very good with the obligations, and she did have a certain amount of competitiveness that translated to charisma in ways that were as big as the big stages she was on, like Saturday Night Live, whatever it is, she could do that. I don't know how many of these women can do that. That's what I'm saying. So she came along and she was that perfect person to do everything she did. If you're just looking at from a fight perspective, like some of these, like obviously Joanna is amazing. She's been amazing, and Amanda Nunes is closer to Tyson than maybe than Rousey was in how she's just lighting people up with her fists. So if we see, I guess we'll find out a lot in how they market Amanda Nunes and how many people take to it and the pay-per-view buys and everything on all the platforms. We'll see if that's still made available to her.
Yeah, and also you can measure Ronda Rousey's impact by her star power and say, well, with that, if that goes away, what is left in the women's game? And of course, it's a huge loss, but by the same token, look at the men's side of the sport. Look at the men's side of the sport, which has been much more established over many, many more years. And let's say Conor McGregor decides that he doesn't want to work at the UFC anymore, and he wants to just retire in the countryside of Ireland and raise his family. What's left? Who are the stars and who are the big stars? I mean, there are certainly some badass fighters on the men's side, just like on the women's side, but there's no superstars out there. I mean, really, it was McGregor and Rousey were the two.
And if they're the
transcendent stars,
if they're the standards now, it's going to be very tough to meet that.
Right.
Like beforehand, it was like we had different ideas of what makes a star, but now we've seen what two stars look like in the sport.
Let me bring it back to the central point though about women's MMA. Here's my thought about it. My basic take is that Rousey did enough to not only turn women's fighting into a big attraction, but from a more technocratic standpoint, they were able to create two divisions in the path that she blazed. But that's only the first revolution. I think there would have to be a second or third, and those could be glacially, right? Hers was like this burst.
Right.
The next one, she only got us this far, but I think it's going to take a lot more work to get it where there's 3 divisions, 4 divisions, and not merely that, but that they begin to fill out.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you feel like that is an inevitability, or if that is really still precarious.
Well, this is something that's not scientific. This was just something that word of mouth, you would talk to people. I felt like she galvanized a younger generation of girls to get involved in the sport. We used to talk to her about her a lot as the Hoist Gracie of women's MMA because he kind of put jiu-jitsu in there, right?
And just like when Gracie did it, gym owners will tell you they had an uptick in women.
That's what I'm saying. So I'm saying I know I've never done a numbers crunch to see like what that rise is,
right.
But you do feel like there were a ton of girls that saw her doing that and wanted to get involved in the sport based on that. So based on that trickle-down effect or that inspiration, I would think that we're going to see a crop coming up pretty soon that'll be very competitive. And in that case, yes, she galvanized that and put it in a good place.
Yeah, inspiration is retroactive too. I mean, what she did is always going to exist, and what she did was pretty spectacular. And like Chuck says, I mean, what I've seen when I've gone to the Rousey fights I've gone to, the building has more women in it. You go to the weigh-ins, you go to any other thing. It just has. Even the people who don't like her, even the ones who root against her, she is one of ours. A woman will say, or young girls will say, and those people who, particularly the younger ones who are starting to go into gyms and training and might be coming up in the ranks and becoming UFC fighters down the road. We're not going to see those people for a while, and we're not going to necessarily be able to link it back to Ronda Rousey directly, but she had her hand in that, and I think that's.
She spoke to so many people. Those people to this day, I still think dug their heels in forever on her. Like they're like, hey, that is a champion, and they're always going to remember whatever reason that association of who she was and what she represented to them. And I feel like she's one of the rare people in the sport that's been able to do that.
And I don't know that you can point to another fighter out there who has been more inspirational in that way. The only other big star we've talked about, McGregor. I don't know that are there people who are saying, well, because of the way Conor McGregor performs, I'm going to get into the sport. Well, he's one of a kind, the way he handles the mic as well as fights. But Ronda Rousey, I mean, I realize that not everybody can aspire to be to be her. Not everybody's going to go out there and win a medal at the Olympics and all that. But it certainly has created an avenue that did not exist before, and at least in a mainstream way, in a way that people can jump along and what am I trying to say? She did something that nobody even envisioned before.
And I was just going to add real quick, we didn't know if people would take to women's MMA because we were obviously following it back, going back to Gina Carano before. You follow it, but it was on another level a little bit because it was in other promotions. We didn't know how it translate, but she proved, I feel like single-handedly, that in the UFC and fighting, you can be bigger or on the same level as a man. And this is not the truth of other sports. Obviously, like the WNBA is not the NBA. It's not treated the same. There's nothing about it. But this rare sport, it's like it's...
Are you mansplaining to me?
No, I'm not.
No, I'm teasing.
But I'm just saying, like,
I understand.
She came in and she proved, like, hey, the media and everybody will treat it exactly the same, if not with more fanfare.
Right. So let's talk about this then, because I feel like we owe the viewers this. There are a certain cast of characters out in media who shall remain nameless, but they are not too hard to find, who have floated the idea that Rousey is a media creation, a fraud. I think some of them have called. Not all of them have said that, but some have said she is a fraud. And my initial reaction to that was like, it's just so utterly idiotic. But I will say that not to defend their ideas, because a lot of the guys who are floating that have this aggrieved worldview that they need to justify by picking out things through their jaundiced lens. However, it is true that there was a lot of not merely careless coverage of her, but we on this very show accused, especially the mainstream media, of hagiography, of the writing of Rousey as if she was some saint. We showed that, you and I watched that video with Edmund before 170, before the show today. She was dropping Olympic boxers with body shots, and you saw her on the cover of The Ring magazine. She conquered MMA, is boxing next, and could she fight Floyd, and blah, blah, blah.
Not only could she fight, but she would beat Floyd.
Would she beat Floyd if Floyd was wearing a jacket in the street? I mean, all these stupid iterations. Here's the truth of it. If you strip that away and you just look at the core of her achievements, it is exemplary, no doubt about it. But I have to agree, Jeff. I'm not saying she's a fraud. Far from it. She is the genuine article, end of argument. But we as the media, I don't want to have to accept blame for someone else's horseshit coverage. But there was a lot of it. There's just no denying it. There was so much hyperbole around her, especially before that home fight, that this market correction we should have seen coming.
Well, let's try to forget what happened against Nunes and forget what happened against Holm. I know those things happen, but let's pretend that we're back in those days. Who is Ronda Rousey? Ronda Rousey is the person who has beat every single person we've seen step in the cage with her in less than a minute. The last three, like I said before, 14, 16, and 34 seconds. I mean, hyperbole is a natural occurrence when you see those kinds of results, and you can argue about the level of competition or whatever, but the best people that the UFC could find to put in with her were failing miserably and not even being competitive with her. So to all the praise that went her way. There was never a moment where where there was any doubt about what she was doing. She was going out there and just dominating everybody so thoroughly, man. We had discussions on this show about her place in pound for pound rankings, and we talked about, well, she's undefeated, and then the counter argument was, well, yeah, but she's competing in a weight class that is pretty thin. But then the counter argument to that is, well, yeah, but she's not just beating those women, she's beating them in 14 seconds and in 16 seconds, and it's not just going 3 rounds and beating somebody who might not be quite at the top level. So no matter how you package it, I don't fault media for seeing this utter dominance against everybody that could be stuck in there with her and praising her. I don't see a problem with that. I mean, there's other issues, but that I don't see.
Yeah, but I mean, they turned her, Chuck. You know this. They turned her into a feminist icon. They turned her. She's literally on the cover of The Ring magazine, the Bible of boxing in a boxing glove.
It felt natural at the time to hear Joe Rogan say, this is a once-in-a-lifetime or once-in-ever athlete. It felt natural to hear these things because at the time there was
okay, hold on. In fairness, hold on, let me do it real quickly.
Yeah.
there were people at the time who were like, this is a little too far for me.
But there was such a hysteria because you had the curiosity of so many other eyes, all these other eyes, and a lot of these people just think in terms of like the old Mike Tyson days, they thought just in terms of her invincibility. And I think that Ronda Rousey, if you read her book, if you do these things, she fed into this invincibility. You know, her upbringing, everything that basically fell into line with her and the way she was dominating people, it speaks for itself that when she was head kicked and went down, the shock of that moment, like the shock of that moment, I think was maybe the craziest thing ever. Even though you saw the writing, well, like you were saying, like you're still waiting for her to come through. As you're watching her get picked apart in this fight, you're still waiting for her to show up. You're waiting for her to show up. That's how heavy it was. It just felt like, and we know that we're deluding ourselves with this. It's fun to delude yourself a lot of times, especially on such an epic scale and when you're close to it. But it's just, we were deluding ourselves into thinking she would never lose. But we did believe, I would have said, there's a great possibility that she's so far ahead of the game that she could walk away, she could win a couple more fights and disappear, and she'll just be that forever. I did believe that was really possible for her. I thought she would beat Holly Holm, and I thought that, you know, there wasn't really anybody in the wings that I was too fearful of, you know, for her to lose to. So it just shows you the cruelty of this fight game, man.
It's amazing. No one gets out. No one gets out alive. George St. Pierre doesn't get out alive. Anderson Silva didn't get out. Fedor didn't get out. And Ronda Rousey's not going to get out alive either. They all get chewed up by the machine.
I wish she realized that more. That's really where it comes down to, right? Like your big problem with it is like, hey, look around. Look at Dominic Cruz and look at these other people. He hadn't lost in 10 years. He just lost. Watch how he loses. It's acceptable to lose.
The MMA Grim Reaper comes for everybody, and I think she had a denial about that.
But that part of it is separate from the other stuff you were talking about, how, you know, being on the cover of Ring magazine, all that kind of stuff. I think that there is hyperbole that exists, and like I said before, I feel as though she set us up for that with her dominance. But it veers into a fantasy world when we say, well, yeah, of course Ronda Rousey could, you know, what do we say, in an MMA fight or in a street fight would beat Layla Ali or whatever. And I still believe that during the day, back in her day, she would, because Layla Ali would have had no way of defending a takedown. I mean, we know that Amanda Nunes had trained on that kind of stuff.
Right. And by the way, go ahead.
But to then take that and say, well, she could go out there and be the best boxer in the world because she's dominating all these women in this sport, or to try to just try to take. Nobody wants to stay in their lane. That's the problem. You say, well, I'm the best MMA fighter out there, and nobody's satisfied with that, and everybody has to take it to a whole other level, and that's where I think we got into a real issue, because, you know, she was the best MMA fighter on the women's side, period.
We never had that hysteria in general. We just never have had that. You could look at any athlete that fought in MMA and be like, wow, they had these moments, but it was still within a contained universe. You know, like it was, Chuck Liddell had appeal. People knew who Chuck Liddell was, but it didn't translate like this. I just felt like she was our first true event. And I think when you have that many so much casual influence feeding into that invincibility and all of this stuff, identities get kind of compromised in that. I mean, it was unique, man. And I don't know if we'll see that. I'm sure we will. I'm sure we'll see something again where we're like, that person is unbeatable.
We're seeing it already. I mean, we've been hearing things about Conor McGregor stepping into a boxing ring with Floyd Mayweather. I mean,
he just lost.
It's kind of this is insanity. This is not. I mean, it doesn't diminish. To say that it's insanity does not diminish what Conor McGregor is as a MMA fighter. Just like you know, reeling in the praise for Ronda Rousey. You know, boxing, forget about it. She was a dominant MMA fighter. McGregor, dominant MMA fighter. But let's not put them into some other realm where they just don't belong.
Let's quickly say something about Amanda Nunes before the internet commenters tear us to pieces for not saying anything. Incredible win by her, a true maturation as a fighter, and it turned out after the fight, quite a gifted self-promoter as well. I'm always going to be sympathetic to immigrants who come here and assimilate, try to learn English and promote themselves. She does media that way. There's a lot of nice things you can say about Amanda Nunes. Here's the question. Can we say she's a star? The big gamble, Dana White justified it that week in Vegas, saying, we don't have to put on these things because if she beats Ronda Rousey, everyone will know. And that is technically true, that if you have a win like that over that kind of celebrity, it's going to carry over. But here's my question. It could have been done a lot better, And what I'm wondering is, she wasn't a star after she beat Miesha Tate on $1 million pay-per-view buy event at UFC 200. I think she'll turn a corner here, but is she a star? Very quickly.
It remains to be seen for me. I'm not hearing people talk about her yet. I don't really feel it, but I mean, she has the makings to do that, but I'm not seeing it yet. I think she speaks volumes with what she's done, like you mentioned, when in the cage going through Miesha Tate and headlining that card in default, but she's still headlining that 200 card, and now this. So I feel like she has the makings, but it remains to be seen for me.
Yeah, I just have to give her an incomplete on this because what have we been talking about up till now? We've been talking about the damaged Ronda Rousey. We've been talking about how this woman who lost 13 months ago stepped into the octagon and was clearly damaged material from the moment she stepped in. Well, that basically is telling us, oh, well, that means Amanda Nunes beat somebody who's already damaged. And you know, that is true, but I also have to say, Amanda Nunes, she needed to be a badass to go in there and show the confidence. You know, she had to have the confidence to go after her, and when she clipped her the first time, she had the confidence to go after, to continue that. And she didn't like just race in there. She didn't race in there and get entangled into a clinch that she didn't want to be in. She fought intelligently and viciously at the same time, and that's a combination not everybody can
She looked
manage.
like a professional fighter going against somebody who hadn't fought before. That's how much of a discrepancy I thought it was in that fight.
I wrote on Twitter, it looked like gym hazing.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
Yes.
if you had a white belt and a black belt, that's about what it would look like, something like that. I think she will be poised to be a star. The big question we asked her earlier was, you know, what did Ronda Rousey establish? The question is, in the damage that Ronda Rousey is taking, does that bleed into women's MMA generally? I guess we'll find out. Another fighter that had Jesus Christ, what can you say about Cody Garbrandt? What a performance. You know, it's been amazing to read the responses. There were a few people that picked him, not many. Most people, I think, thought Dominic Cruz would win, which is fair. We're talking about a guy with the highest fight IQ, I think, in the game. And I'm seeing so many people not merely eat crow, but be glad to do so. You're like, you know what? Cody's neck tattoos put me on monkey stilts, mega tilts, but the guy's incredible. He's just incredible. So now I'll give you the same question, Jeff. I'll start with you this time. Maybe we'll see what happens with Amanda Nunes. Cody Garbrandt, though, I'm not ready to declare him a star. He didn't beat someone big enough on a big enough platform to just have that overnight sensation thing in the way that Holly Holm kind of did, where she's on, you know, Michael Strahan and Kelly. But was a star born? L'enfant, baby. But was he born?
Yeah, I think that might be the case. I will say this: if anybody who picked Garbrandt to win, and like you said, I agree with you. I didn't see too many people picking him before, but I guarantee you that not one person picked him to win a fight like that. Anybody that picked him to win, anybody that picked Garbrandt to win, you know, envisioned him doing, you know, going out there and clipping Cruz in the first round and putting him out with like a punch, or, you know, knocking him down with a punch and then finishing him on the ground. I don't think anybody envisioned him. You know, it basically, he became Dominic Cruz, and Dominic Cruz became the bull, trying to you know, it was. I've never seen. That was one of the most impressive performances that I've ever seen in the octagon.
I've heard that a lot. That's what's coming out of that fight.
Because you can see Dominic Cruz lose in your mind.
Yes. Yeah.
But you never saw him get befuddled.
Not like that.
Amazing.
He's the one bewitching people in that octagon, right? And now when to see him, the tables turn on him. It was like he was Dominic Cruz with Anderson Silva, because it was the movement was almost like those old vintage Forrest Griffin or somebody coming at him, and he's just moving, you know, just getting out of the way of the punches. To me, that stuff is mesmerizing, and I mean, especially on a stage like that where his teammate, you got to think about his teammates have lost to this guy, you know, for years, and there's got to be some kind of stigma or some kind of mental thing attached to that with his gym. He shows up there like he had none of that attached to him, like he was a completely, which he is, he's a completely different fighter, but just completely divorced of that and dictated it that way. That tells me the kid has got some true belief. And we know his backstory about how he came up with Maddox Maple and the kid with leukemia and all that stuff. I've talked to him on several occasions, I'm sure you have too, but it's like, I really believe this kid has like a very deep, grounded belief system in himself that finally came out. We've seen him destroy guys with his boxing and his power, and that's one of the knocks we were putting on him going into this fight was, well, power's not going to beat Dominic Cruz. Dominic Cruz will outsmart him, and just to see him putting the cerebral side of it, the showman side of it, and the power side of it, dropping him, Yeah, it doesn't get much better than that.
The folks at Zuffa had to be, thrilled. Those two guys that week, we all know it, they were the ones who were selling that fight the best they could, doing the media they could. Their scrum was super well attended. They go in there, they had this war of words. It went viral itself to an extent, at least within the MMA space. And they get on there and they had a tremendous performance. And of course, after the fact, you had all that bad blood put aside. He puts the belt around this kid who was the cancer survivor. Dominic Cruz, to his own credit, goes out there and handles it at the press conference. Quite an amazing turn of events. I don't think that we can go, everyone's like, well, can he go headline a UFC pay-per-view? I'm not buying that
I'm
yet.
with you on that. I'm not sure either.
I'm not that. But can he co-main event against an interesting opponent? Yes, he can. That is definitely the space he can occupy. And as Ariel Helwani had noted, you could take him and Stipe to Cleveland, and you're just printing money at the gate.
Yeah, and I don't know that there was anything that he could have done better to make himself.
The whole thing.
I mean, really, that end when he finished the fight, he gets the belt. And he wraps around that young boy's. I mean, I get a little bit emotional just thinking about that.
Yeah.
When he did that, this is a moment that he has imagined his entire life for him finally to become a champion.
Well, he's 25. I mean.
Okay, but he's been thinking about that for a good decade, right?
Sure.
And he finally achieves this, and it's his moment. It's his moment. But he had the wherewithal to not make it all about himself, and it was like he genuinely wanted to share that moment with his friend, and that's how he treated this kid. I mean, it was really one of the most remarkable moments. Again, I mean, when I say he had an amazing performance, I will include that as part of it.
Right.
I mean, this kid, he could not have done anything better, and I'll reinforce that. If he had gone out and clipped Cruz 10 seconds into the fight, if he did like a McGregor over Jose Aldo thing and knocked him out. Yeah, he'd be the champion, but it would not have been as impressive to me.
He feels like he's already been worn into the shoes of a champion too, because not only does he, have Dillashaw lined up, but then he looks right by his old former teammate and starts calling out Jose Aldo in money fights, which is always a funny thing. Because some guys don't play that game, and I feel like pays attention on a lot of levels.
It's like people always like, why can't fighters do X? Why can't fighters say Y? Because they're not good at it. And some guys, you see Cody Garbrandt, and it's just effortless from soup to nuts. It's incredible. Now, funny you bring that up. There's a lot of different angles here. We could have talked about Conor McGregor, but I just want to move along because there's just so many other things happening right now in MMA. Namely, let's inventory the current predicament, shall we? We have Cody Garbrandt who wins. First reaction is, I'll fight TJ Dillashaw. Then he goes, I'll give Dominic Cruz a rematch, whatever the order was there. I can't quite recall at this point. Then he gets on Ariel's show on Monday. Oh, no. He wants to fight Conor McGregor. He wants to fight Jose Aldo. On the same MMA hour, then you have Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. Khabib Nurmagomedov is saying, I'll pay you $200,000, while Tony says, I want the same amount of money as Khabib. Dana White told us a week before he wasn't going to give it to him, so that's in play. Then you have Tyron Woodley making a deal, however informal, with Michael Bisping to fight at 180, also putting out a poll on his Twitter feed, doesn't include Demian Maia. Demian Maia on my show yesterday says he knows he was offered Robbie Lawler. He turned it down because he thinks he's due a title shot. I don't think he's got a bad argument. And that he knows other people were offered a title shot against Tyron Woodley, and his name was not on the list. I could keep going. There are 1,000 different iterations of this I could mention. But Chuck, you and I were talking about this before the show. Okay. What is happening? I know there are 2 UFC matchmakers, but it doesn't feel like it. This is a free-for-all, and I don't know which direction the winds are headed here.
This is the new business as usual, isn't it? It's like, I feel like that's what's kind of happening these days. There are no... We used to be able to look at 2 guys and say, this is the guy who's next, and this is the guy who's the champion. It just made sense.
Or that, and then there was a wild card.
Right.
This wild card might be in play.
But it was as simple as that. It was a fairly simple equation. The Conor McGregor thing has changed that. I really believe Conor McGregor is the catalyst for this because his whole Segway series with Nate Diaz, and then he goes back to his original quest of fighting for the lightweight belt. It's more calling your shots with the ability to do that, you're leveraging yourself into those positions. And now we're seeing a lot of other guys do it. You mentioned, like, obviously Max Holloway wins his. He wants
There's another one you could throw that on.
It's like there's so much of that. It's almost like what complication awaits after we get clarity? Because even on that Toronto card, we were like, everybody going in, it was like, we're going to have some clarity coming out of this because we'll have, and then, Pettis misses weight, so then it's a half equation where one guy, it's like it always gets more complicated before it gets clarity. And then Holloway wins it, and what does he do? He gets offered the fight with but he wants to take the time off, and now it's like it goes in so many directions. And then you find out that Nurmagomedov was offered all for leverage on these other things. There is nothing that's certain anymore. I feel like the rankings are just, not that we ever put too much stock in the UFC rankings, but those are just complete garbage at this point. They matter nothing. And a lot of guys are just like, I should go ahead and fight publicly for what I think I should get. I want the money fight. You're seeing that more and more. And my guy, I think it's only going to get nuttier from here.
They become lobbyists as much as fighters.
Yeah, the UFC has created all these interim belts that we kind of ridicule week in and week out. Because they don't mean anything, but it's becoming such that not just the interim belts don't mean anything, but the real belts are starting to lose their meaning as well because they're not what people are going after. Some people, Demi Maia wants a belt, and you'll hear fighters here and there talk about how the quest for the belt is important. But really,
real quickly, Demian Maia told me on more than one occasion he wouldn't take a fight with St. Pierre even for the money because it's not the fight that gets him the title.
Right.
Fact.
There are still some guys who think that way, but it seems as though the tide is turning toward the money. And you mentioned McGregor. McGregor was the guy who kind of put this blueprint out there. And I know that you can't completely follow the blueprint because not everybody's a star like Conor McGregor. Not everybody can sell a fight like Conor McGregor. But these guys are starting to realize, well, maybe I can't sell a fight in such a way we're going to make this amount of money, but I can sell a fight so we can make this amount, and that's more than what I would get if I fought for the title.
Guys are fun, yeah.
Okay,
So I would say that the number one thing right now is not necessarily Conor, but it's the $4 billion. People see that money,
That's true too.
and they say,
both sides, for sure.
I want my piece of that, and they see they recognize that the UFC is more than ever a money-making operation, and these guys will go along with whatever it is that's going to make the most money, even if it makes no sense for this weight class.
2012, when we used to talk, somewhere around 11 or 12, we were starting getting the idea of super fights. We were talking about GSP against Anderson Silva against John Jones. Those were really the iteration. Maybe John Jones against the heavyweight.
And they were unattainable.
You couldn't really do it, and we were always talking about, well, Dana White's go-to was they have to clean out their division. And of course, that's nearly impossible to do. Now you've got guys like Demetrius Johnson. There are a couple of examples of guys who have done that. But you're in the casual super fight phase where let's casually get together and do a super fight. I feel like that's where we're at. Where it's no longer the thing you're pining for because a lot of these guys are new champions. So they're not guys who've been on top forever and a super fight comes together. It's more like guys who just get the belt, and the business sense is to say, like, you know what, you would make for a better fight for me, and they just start calling each other out. It's just a really interesting dynamic.
Don't you guys, I don't know exactly what it will look like. I don't have a good a sense or a vision, I should say, of how it's going to appear, but I worry about a sport where guys like Demian Maia, you could poke holes in anyone's resume, but his resume for a title shot is pretty good. And I worry about a sport where guys not only don't know how to get a title shot because who knows what the criteria are at this point, but where champions have no responsibility to their weight class. Right. This disturbs me a little bit. I definitely, of course, who wants all the big money fights? Who doesn't want to see Cody Garbrandt fight whoever, Jose Aldo? This is the stuff of dreams.
Demian Maia just happened to be ready where there's a Michael Bisping who can slide into a
under what argument is Tyron Woodley versus Demian Maia a bad fight? That is a thrilling fight on paper. Right. And am I alone here? Aren't you guys a little bit, frightened's a strong word, but I'm a little bit concerned.
Well, and we're also marketing Demian Maia before his Fox show with Carlos Condit
right,
as a chance. It wasn't definitively said he was going to get the title shot, but it was kind of like we that was the understanding, and that just goes away.
He's not even getting offered it.
Right? Yeah, I saw Tyron Woodley's. His tweet, basically, the three guys, hey, who do you want to see me fight? And Demian Maia's not even on the list. And you're like, so Demian Maia's now fourth? It's just pole position at this point. You're like, how are these guys lining up? It's really interesting. Tyron Woodley was one of those guys, obviously, who, when he won his, he was immediately into that phase of who would I like to fight. And Michael Bisping has followed. Michael Bisping actually was before him, but you know what I'm saying. These guys are they're all doing the same formula at this point.
A reader left a super interesting message on my Facebook wall. He goes, I like interim titles because those are the guys who, when they get the title, they fight number one contenders.
Right. That's an interesting.
That is a stunning thing to say. The champion goes off and
stunning because it's true.
It's so true. He's like, that's why I like interim titles because that guy's fighting top contenders. Yeah. That is really striking.
And it also creates another, shiny brass and leather thing that goes around somebody's waist. And even if you don't you look deeply and you don't give it much credence, it's another prop. It's another prop that you could put on a desk at a press conference. So this guy's got one, this guy's got one. Ooh, it's champion versus champion. Even if, so why not just, we were joking, I think, on the last show about, well, everybody should be a champion, or they should create the, like pro wrestling, how the world champion and the intercontinental champion and all that stuff. We're almost at the point where we're starting to look at that and say, well, let's just use these things as props in order to create the fights that people out there who don't necessarily know, if you're not, just think of, you're inside this realm of MMA, but just think about those people out there who are just starting to start following the sport a little bit. How do you suss out who's important and who's not? Well, one of the ways you do that is by seeing who's got the belt. And if you've got a bunch of belts and two guys with belts are competing against each other, ooh, that's a big fight. I should watch that.
This.
Yes.
How many title fights are booked right now?
Well, we got we have the one for 208.
Yeah.
And the one for 208.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's how crazy the landscape is right now. So everything else is a battle for position. It's crazy. I don't know if I've ever seen
There's no champion right now who is slated to defend the belt.
And that's sort of a make-believe poof out of thin air belt. That's not even a real.
Right. Let me float a theory. Part of it is this whole $4 billion thing. I do not know this to be true. Let me put this disclaimer up there. This is merely a theory. But part of me feels like it's not. Look, you talk to anyone. Sean Shelby is not a pushover, and I forget the new matchmaker's name, so please forgive me. But
McMaynard.
Yeah, right. Okay. But part of me feels like when Joe Silva was around, you would hear guys, Joe Silva, give me a fight, and when you would interview a fighter, they would tell you how much they petitioned Joe Silva. Now they're petitioning the public in a way, and it kind of feels like when Joe Silva was around, Daddy's home. Yeah. Daddy's home, and you better pay attention. But when Joe Silva's gone, it feels like the guys are losing control. You think there's something to that?
No,
it's speculative.
Totally think
I understand, but there's a shift going on.
Well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It may have been not just that Joe Silva's gone, but it also may be that he's gone because he realizes the tide is turning, that people are going a whole different direction to get their fights. Because, look, the UFC, it has to come down to that amount of money that they pay. The guys who bought this company need to make some money. And where are the stars? Well, they got one real star left, and he's going out there buying prams, for his baby to be. That's, they got to get him back in there, and then they got to try to make stars. They got Garbrandt. They've got these other guys who they're trying to build up. How are they going to do it? Well, one way to do it is to put two belts on the line together. How else are you going to do it? It's they really are in a predicament where we're just creating regular old title fights may not be enough anymore for them.
Cut to Joe Silva on the beach drinking his pina colada.
Right.
Not Joe Silva, but Lorenzo Fertitta.
Yeah.
Lorenzo Fertitta, he got out just in time. Every time we get into the schedule, I like to imagine him in some tropical area.
Yeah. Extra umbrella.
Yes.
With a beard like twice as long as yours, just like sitting there.
Could you blame him? Wow. Okay, we have just a little bit of time left, but I kind of want to transition to a topic that I'll be honest, bit of a blind spot personally. Got a little bit more coverage than I thought it would. Not that I didn't think it would get coverage, but some of the response has been interesting, which is the, what do you want to call it? The dismissal, the removal, the now absence of longtime UFC commentator Mike Goldberg. We don't know exactly why he's gone. Was his contract up? Did they terminate it with some clause? Whatever the case, his last event after, roughly 19 years was UFC 207. And look, I can only tell you what I have a decent understanding of. Look, that job where you're flying out to these random cities, and he was doing 30 cards a year, and you're showing up to Vancouver, whatever it is, 4 days in advance, and you got to talk to everyone. This is not an easy job. The truth about television, though, is that here's the good news: they pay you truckloads of money. That's the big secret of television, if you don't know. If you want to make money in media, work in TV, because the checks will blow your brains out.
Is this considered TV?
We get money here?
No,
Right.
This is considered nubs. This is considered Donkville, and we're the co-mayors. So he got paid handsomely, I guarantee it. But the truth of the matter is also, one of the ways in which they justify paying you that much money is they don't treat you all that great, especially at the end. And this is just my personal opinion. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about it, and we'll talk about his legacy in just a second. But the question is, should they have handled it differently? Should they have given him the ability to sign off? Because I think when Joe Rogan goes, they are going to give him that. But here's the truth. If they don't want you around in the television business, you don't get a goodbye. you just don't get it. If they don't want you around in the radio business, you don't get a goodbye. That was one of the first lessons I was ever taught at the very minimal level I've done either of those things. So, Jeff, you and I were disagreeing about this before the show. Did the UFC handle the Mike Goldberg dismissal correctly?
Absolutely not. I mean, the fact that he's gone, that's their decision. And you can go on anywhere on the internet and you'll see a lot of strong opinions about what kind of job he did as an announcer. A lot of people hated him as an announcer. I don't know too many people who will say they loved it. Me, I felt like he was an iconic voice, and for many years. What is it? He was there for almost 20 years.
20 years.
20 years. So for most of the time that I've been watching the sport, that's the guy whose voice I heard that's the voice that was ringing through my head as these fights were going on. And so there's something to be said for that. Whether you liked him or hated him, that's a side issue. The guy's around for all that time. He's served you guys. He has helped you build the sport into something big. Give him his moment. Give him his moment to say goodbye, to say thank you to the people that helped him out. I thought it was pretty classless.
Yeah, I think it's funny because he is the soundtrack, right? He's the guy that you think of. He's like the Al Michaels with Monday Night Football and later Sunday Night Football, the big game, the big night game. It's always, if Al Michaels is kind of voicing it, you think this must be the big game type of thing. That's sort of how I feel about him because it wasn't just that he was calling the fights and he had his little catchphrases at the beginnings and ends of these fights.
Turks, embrace the grind, the whole bit.
Yeah. But it was also it was always a Muay Thai fight, at the beginning of the whole, its voice was just so prevalent through the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And I would say that since he predates really Zuffa, he was there, I think from 97, and he's been through the whole thing. They're a private company and they were largely a pay-per-view based company. I guess they still operate, in a big pay-per-view area. So it's like, given that it was a pay-per-view and this is basically programming that they're in control of, I would have liked to have seen them do it just because. I mean, they've been weird about giving anybody props. Like, they just got rid of Chuck Liddell. He didn't feel, and this was Joe Silva's last thing.
Unceremoniously.
Unceremonious. But since he is a guy that you associate with, I guess, so publicly, and he is your direct link to this, it would have been, I guess I wouldn't have minded seeing something like that. I wasn't overly offended. I know how you think of it, and I know that that's the TV business, but I'm like, I feel like it was within their power to say, if you want to say a little something at the end, go ahead.
I'm sort of torn on this because, would I have minded if they had given him one? No, of course not. Sure. It wouldn't have hurt anybody. It would not have hurt anyone to give him, 60 seconds at the end of the broadcast?
Rogan may just do it because he's sort of, being a...
I bet he got strict instructions not to say anything. Or I bet Rogan was like, I don't want to take this moment from him. I don't want to make it all about me in some kind of way. So, there's that. I mean, it wouldn't have hurt to do it. But the truth of the matter is, I guess, like I said, I'm torn. On the one hand, if a company buys another one, and so then they own it, and they're getting rid of a guy, they don't owe him anything. And I know that is so cold and it's so hard to hear, but it's truthful. I mean, if Vox Media decides to get rid of me, they're not going to give me one last MMA beat to go and wish you guys a happy New Year.
Security guard to get
they'll be. He'll have the censor.
I'll be out on the street with my pockets like elephant ears. But there's another part of this argument where I do understand some of the pushback. It's another form. However understandable in the TV business this is, it's another demonstration of WME being tone deaf to its own fans. Mm-hmm. Because a bunch of fans came out and were like, whoa, wait a second. I'm not saying Goldie is Doc Emmerich for crying out loud, but he's our guy, and we would like to see our guy taken care of.
That's really it.
It fits into every one of these things. We're just like, if you guys cared about this, we don't care.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's a good idea.
That's exactly the thing. You just nailed it. I think that's it. He's a knucklehead, but he's our knucklehead, right? That's the kind of concept of it, because we all know that maybe he's not on top of it. I really don't think he tried to evolve. Like you mentioned, there's a million events that he's doing, but I don't think he really tried to evolve beyond where was comfortable doing it. Maybe I think there could have been subtle things he could have done. And you hear some things about Goldberg and, just personal life and stuff, and you think, well, maybe he's just dealing what he's dealing in, and he's just not going to turn a corner. And that was a couple years ago, 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And at some point, it's coming, I guess. But it doesn't take away from the fact that he has been the voice for so long of that telecast.
There are fans who only know that.
Right.
Absolutely.
And also, I think bringing us to the bigger picture is a really good idea because if the Fertittas were still owning this company and they decided they were going to move on bring in a different guy. I think that there would have been some kind of a little allowance for him to say something. I think there would have been. And I think that, this company, this WME comes in, they start cleaning house, they're getting rid of staff left and right. And they are, they get rid of him without even a notice. I mean, and they don't talk. They don't have any access to the media to talk about what their plan is going to be. I think that the fighters, this all jumps right back to the stuff we talked about earlier in the show about how fighters are starting to be a little bit more difficult to work with because they realize. This is not a family. This is not the corner store. It's not the family store down the corner. This is no longer, like what is it, like Uncle Frank and that Conor talked about having a little whiskey at the end of the night. Now Conor McGregor's complaining that they're not flying out to Dublin. Well, they should fire up that corporate private jet and get over there with their checkbook because they need some stars. And I think that this kind of is another way just to show that this is a whole new world now, and it's not a world that I really like. I totally appreciate what you're talking about,
sure.
how the media is the TV world can be cruel, but you know what? When you got a guy for 20 years, give him his moment.
Fair enough. So let's end on this if we can. Brock Lesnar suspended by USADA for a year for having just a smorgasbord.
Is that all he got?
You know what's kind of funny about that? You mentioned that. So here's how this all ties together. Mark Hunt was threatening, or at least, he was threatening a lawsuit. Ultimately, he's not going to bring one because it turns out today, after the UFC 200 fight, where, of course, we know what happened, that he is going to fight Alistair Overeem at UFC 209. And why does he say that? Because he says, what choice do I have? I am stuck in this contract. I've already missed out on millions. He's past 40 years old. He does make a decent check. He is a fairly decent size star, at least in the heavyweight division. Fans do love him. And so here's the question. Brock Lesnar comes in, skips the USADA testing pool, beats Mark Hunt, makes a big amount of money, barely gets suspended for it, goes back to WWE, goes and makes yet more money. Mark Hunt sat out for that amount of time in a protest that didn't work, and now he's going to fight after doing all that. Lyoto Machida admits to using something that will barely help you if you're obese, much less an elite athlete. Here is the question to you, Jeff. Does cheating pay?
Absolutely.
How can you say no?
Absolutely. There's no question. I mean, if Mark Hunt, he's going out there and fighting. If I'm him, I'm going out and finding somebody who's going to give me something that's going to turn. I guarantee when Mark Hunt walks into there against Overeem's going to look like the 98-pound weakling, and Mark Hunt is going to be buff. He's going to be like 6'7", and he's going to be look like a power lifter. He's going to walk in there strutting around. And then afterward, he'll pop for something, and he'll say, who cares? I made my millions, and I learned my lesson. Goodbye.
Ironic that he's fighting Alistair Overeem, right? I mean, after this whole thing, it's like the extra
history. He's got no history of.
It's like the extra insult to injury,
It's amazing, isn't it?
I know they did ding, though, Lesnar for $250,000, though.
Well, they really showed him. They really showed him, didn't they?
I mean, the whole thing is just. We've been through this before. It is so backwards the way that these things are doled out.
It is a comedy.
It is a comedy, unless you're Mark Hunt at this point or guys like him. It's just, if I was like Lyoto Machida, I would be beside myself. But I mean, it's just, this is the way our sport is. It's so funny that the way that we come up with these punishments that don't fit the crimes. I mean, I always go back to the lifetime ban on, you're talking about Diaz, and I mean, just whether it's coming from USADA or it's coming from the commission, it just doesn't make any sense, man. And Brock Lesnar could return in 2017
and make another
do it again, and that's what's so crazy about it. So I mean, to me, I'm like, yeah, it's a futile thing for Mark Hunt, and you hate to see it, but honestly, the whole way he was talking about and what he was asking for, I'm like, you knew it was futile in the end. If he was going to keep fighting, you knew he was going to have to do exactly what he's doing.
Well, at least Lesnar's not smoking weed, though. That we don't want any kind of that kind of.
I want to make one last point about Lyoto Machida because I don't think we spoke a lot about it on this show, and I'm not saying it was the world's biggest news. I don't pretend that. But here's what I would say about Lyoto Machida. Like, we saw a lot of this with the Cyborg stuff. When she had this disgraceful fall that just happened recently, which happened after the last time we had MMA Beat. We had MMA Beat. We go to lunch and we look at our phones. And we're like, oh my God, we missed all that news. So what are you gonna do? But it's just amazing to me. Like, people. You guys know my position on anti-doping. I have a slightly different one than a lot of people. But it's hard for me to take seriously these concerns about anti-doping when you see what happens to Lesnar, and he barely gets, any punishment at all, right? And then you have this admission by Lyoto Machida for a substance that is borderline innocuous. The science on it could not be more sketchy in terms of proving it's performance enhancing. He gets 18 months, and there is nary a word from the fan base about how unbelievable this is. Forgive me if I don't take your position on anti-doping seriously when you only have outrage for cops and robbers and you have none for a grotesque injustice for this guy. Am I a little bit off on that one?
No, people look at headlines. They don't look deeply into the story. I've seen you on Twitter, when people have come at you with some story, with some kind of headline out there, and people come at you, and then you'll be like, well, if you read the story, you'd notice that, people read headlines and they see, Lyoto Machida pops for whatever, and that's all they see. I think that this is human nature. This is not something that's only happens in this sport. But it's definitely is bad, and you know what? This stuff could be remedied. For one thing, Lesnar should not have seen a dime until he passed the drug test. At the end, in what universe is it okay to pay him and then say, oh yeah, well we're going to, here's your money, and after we get the drug test, we may ask you for a portion of it back.
You want to tune out a large portion of the fan base. Mention the Muhammad Ali Act. Mention USADA. Right. I swear, if you mention those two things, there's a certain kind of fan that's going to be interested in that because they pay attention to those details. But there is a large amount of fans that just don't want to think about those details.
And media too. We can't just blame the fans. There's a lot of media that tune that stuff out just as much. So everyone is guilty with that. Well, that's a really peaceful note to end on.
Yes.
Jeez.
I just nodded off. You mentioned the Muhammad Ali. I nodded off.
You went straight to sleep.
It's past your nap time. Okay. Hey, are we on next week? Boy, I come prepared for this show.
It's a good question. I think so.
Tune in.
Is anyone from the site going to Phoenix? Sean will be there.
Sean will be there. Sean will shot it.
I don't know if Ariel will be there. I guess. Are you guys free next week? We can do this again.
Why not?
We might as well if you guys are free.
You might have 2 weeks in a row of this dysfunction. Congratulations.
Probably with Ariel next week. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Okay, I assume we'll be back next week. I don't know in what form, but we will do our best to form the Voltron that is MMA Beat. Thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it. A weekend free of MMA up this coming one, which means copious Jim Beam will be swallowed by your boy. I don't know what these two jokers will probably do. Something that involves, I don't know.
Happy Van Week.
Yes.
The Diaz brothers are coming over.
Something with Simon and Garfunkel, I bet. Okay, that is Chuck. That is Jeff. I am Luke for Ariel. Thank you so much for watching. I think we're back next week. And until next time, hands up, chin down, let 'em fly. This is the MMA Beat.